What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me is my great co-host, Ralph Hanna. And guys, happy Valentine's Day. Love is in the air, and I think the love is given to the Paraguay U20 team because after the performances that we saw last night especially, we have a lot of love to spread for that team. We'll talk about them and how they've done in the U20 qualifiers for the World Cup in Chile. We'll also talk about what happened to Nacional as they tried to either continue their Copa Libertadores campaign or if it's ended. We'll also talk about what happened to Diego Gomez because he obviously got on the pitch. He got some minutes against Chelsea in the FA Cup playing for Brighton. We'll talk about how he did there because I think he's definitely impressed a lot of people, not just Paraguayans, but certainly a lot of Brighton fans. But I'm glad to have Ralph here, and I guess we have to kick it off here because I think the big news here, as I talked about, this love that we're spreading is to the U20 side because as of today, as of last night, of course, with the game, Paraguay are back at the U20 World Cup. They have qualified officially for the World Cup in Chile, the first World Cup that they'll be playing in that level since 2013. So it's been 12 years, 12 long years, Ralph, since Paraguay have been able to do it. And honestly, the circumstances have been really crazy, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I just got to ask you, how are your emotions feeling just a little over 12 hours since that qualification uh, to the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, very, very happy. Firstly, I think mostly for the players of everything because they had such a difficult time with the tournament, the way they were almost set up for failure after two games, getting rid of the coach and having to bring someone else in. And the team itself, the squad itself, I think we talked about it before. It's a mix of a lot of players that hadn't played together before. It's not like a U17s that has come up together. So they had a lot, I think, to work through. And what they really showed in that whole tournament was a lot of resilience. I mean, just a funny stat that I was looking today. So the games Paraguay won, they had under 40% possession, except for the very opener against Peru. The games they lost, they had more than 40% possession. So you can kind of see that it was a team that was playing on the back foot, on the counter, and they really had to dig in. There's so many kind of good individual performances we can pick out. But I really think the players have a lot to do with it. And then of course Antolin Alcaraz and Teto Cristallo, his assistant, who came in and had to take over. And after Dusha was set aside for after two games. But I really think it's the way the group of players responded, especially losing 6-0 to Uruguay. That could really break you, I think, as a team, as a group of players. And instead they responded, and yesterday was kind of the perfect revenge or circle, right? Because they faced Uruguay. By beating them, Uruguay were out of the World Cup. Paraguay were in. So that 2 weeks ago is kind of just forgotten about. And you see both teams are on the pitch crying, Paraguay players crying with joy, and Uruguay with kind of frustration and despair that they missed the chance. Because just a quick word about them, I mean, they fell apart in the final stage, right? They did what I've seen Paraguay teams do in the past, where they've been a very good team, but they've not had that resilience or maybe even that kind of physical strength to go through these games that come very thick and fast. So yeah, really proud of the players for how they managed to get through.
In a way, it's that Paraguayan resistance that we've always been used to. The fact that, when the going gets tough, with their backs against the wall, they always try to find a way. And maybe it's not as pretty. And we've seen a lot of these games where Paraguay have performed, and yeah, they've gotten wins, but they have been very much, risky wins, or the fact that, they're wins that you don't really see as them, kind of flourishing, like he's a big example, but like what Argentina did to Brazil or something like that. Like it wasn't convincing. So the fact that they were able to do that, and obviously yesterday was such a big moment because obviously qualifying one day, so one match before the final one, beating Uruguay, like I said, like you said, the defending champions, a team that beat them 6-0 just a couple of weeks ago. I think it really is a huge turnaround because, like you said, yeah, obviously when you have a manager sacked mid tournament, and like you said, the result can be such a huge blow for them from a morale point of view, but then to change their manager, change the formation, change the tactics, everything that you had trained for before you have gone to Venezuela, and now this kind of big turnaround in a circumstance like you said, Paraguay, they've been so close in the past, like it's been 12 years since they've done that, so they've been in this kind of situation before, but they always kind of fall at the first hurdle. So Yeah, it's an incredible turnaround. And I think from the last week, we'll talk about because we've had already now 3 games since we last spoke, Ralph. The ballsy 2-1 win against Chile. There was really we'll start with that, I guess, because that's I think we have a yin and yang, and obviously the sort of qualification game against Uruguay. But that first game against Chile, the host, they really weren't playing anything. They really it wasn't really something that was kind of risky for them because, of course, they were going to qualify anyway as hosts. But in that game, in kind of the decisive win, especially after losing 4-0 to Colombia, you thought Paraguay were going to blow it again because of that goal from Chile, I think 7 minutes from time. But again, Luca Kamen, we're going to talk about him in this segment because he's kind of been one of the star players for them. He shows up what he needs to, scoring that decisive winning goal.
Yeah, and it was really a game where it was very tight, and then Paraguay managed to take the lead through, I think, another one of their star players who kind of became starter ahead of Komet, right, is Octavio Alfonso from Guarani. I mean, Dusha tried to play them together, but you can't really have both of them and also defend as they found out. But Alfonso gives them the lead, and then you thought, okay, how will Paraguay see this out? And I think they really started dropping back a bit too much, right? They dropped that intensity. They didn't have much of the ball before that, but now they were conceding a lot of territory, and it really felt like a matter of time until Chile would score. As much as Facundo Lirusi was doing very well, and by the way, it is Lirusi, not Insfran. He officially changed his name when he was 18. I was just chatting to somebody online before there, so that's why he has Lirusi, his mom's name, on the back of the shirt. I mean, he was making some great saves as he has done all tournament, but you just felt like, oh, they're just sitting back, sitting back. Chile are going to find a way, and they do. And then you felt, okay, I mean, you really can't afford to draw this game because, like you said, Chile are already qualified for the World Cup. They're kind of they're a team that everybody needs to beat just to make sure they're in with a chance. And Komet comes on, and we know what a good player he is, but he's not really known for scoring headed goals. I mean, he's more, a playmaker and with that nice left foot. But it starts with him the move where he finds Gabriel Aguayo, who had a really good game, I thought, against Chile, probably his best game of the tournament there. And Aguayo finds him with the cross, just as he'd found Alfonso with the pass before. So he was involved in both goals, Gabriel Aguayo. And then that header, I mean, you've just seen Lirusi make these great saves for Paraguay down one end, and then the Chilean goalkeeper kind of flaps at the header from Komet, and that really becomes the difference, right? That maybe the standard of the two goalkeepers. But that was such a big moment for Paraguay because it meant they knew we just need one win, mainly against Uruguay, because that was going to be their direct rival to go through, and it just put them on in a good place going into these final 3 games that they had.
Yeah, obviously the game against Brazil was really a tough one. I thought they played better than the game against Chile. Even though they did lose 3-1, I thought Paraguay really responded much better. And kind of that inconsistency, kind of you feared for the worst in that game against Uruguay, that like decisive game where, you know, yes, Pauli got the goal and ultimately it was a really nice goal, but you kind of felt that like, okay, is the shoe gonna drop? Or are they actually going to get the result here, and they ended up doing it, and rightly so. I think this is certainly a performance that I think on the long term, and we have to wait and see because obviously that U20 World Cup doesn't start till September, so we have a long way to go. There could be some players out here that might not even be on the squad. Maybe there will be some new names. There's a lot of time left until this tournament in Chile, but I think ultimately that game yesterday and you saw the emotion from, like you said, from those players celebrating. I'm looking at the videos from social media, celebrating themselves with their manager, with Antonina Caraz. I think it's such a huge morale boost for a lot of these players. And again, after 12 years, you look at some of the players that have come from Paraguayan teams from I'm looking the team that was born in 93, 94 that played that 2013 World Cup, and now you have players that were born in like 2007, 2008. Those type of players. I think it's certainly something that is a huge thing for them and for this generation that I think is going to be it's going to make a lot of people hopefully proud in the next few months.
Yeah, it's a big moment for a lot of these players, especially the guys, mostly the ones that came from Argentina, because they hadn't played much senior football. So for them, this is a huge moment knowing that they're going to have that because some of them haven't made senior debuts yet. So it's like, okay, but now I know I'm at a World Cup. So the chance of my career progressing, because remember when you're in those as a young player, 18, 19, and you still haven't made a debut, there's a very big possibility you might not end up being a professional footballer. It's not a given. So going to the World Cup now and being on that kind of platform is going to help a lot of those players for sure. And then in the case of those that have made their senior debuts and are doing well, like someone like Gabriel Aguayo, I mean, this is a big moment for him. That's already maybe a few European clubs have looked at him, but now when you're at under 20s World Cups, it's much bigger. I think the people you mentioned, the 2013, who I remember, I think when afterwards, Derlis Gonzalez, for example, ended up in Switzerland and then Portugal, Ukraine. Like he had a short career, but a career in Europe, and I can't remember who else was in that team, but quite a few of them got big moves thanks to going to the World Cup. And then what I wanted to just talk about quickly is the game itself. You have to remember that parts of the Miguel Almiron, of course, yeah, Gustavo Gomez who goes to Milan. So these are big moments so for the team, for the players. But also, I just wanted to go back to Uruguay game. When Gianpaoli scores, it's almost at the same time Alfonso scored in the game against Chile, and then they start getting under pressure again, right, from Uruguay. So they must have been mentally, some of the players thinking, okay, we're in this similar situation. We just have to hold out. We have to hold out. I mean, again, Lirusi was up to the task. I'm trying to remember. I remember making some good saves from distance more than Uruguay really getting into the box. When they did get into the box, I thought Petit, he kind of missed a couple of good chances. He was so good in the 6-0, but today or yesterday, he missed a couple of chances. But surely that was weighing on their shoulders, like, oh, this happened against Chile, and we really have to hold out here. It was a similar period of time, and really similar game in terms of the possession, the way they played. So that must have been weighing on their shoulders, and it was. I mean, it was a shame for Uruguay because they defended that set piece so badly. But for Paraguay, it was such a classic goal, right? I mean, Alfonso with the free kick. I think it's Quintana wins the first header, and then Gianpaoli heads in the goal. So it's a header assisted by a header. I mean, it can't get more Paraguayan, right, than that. And then you win 1-0. I'm sure Antolin Alcaraz, who of course scored a header at the World Cup. I'm sure he loved that as well. But yeah, going in terms of looking forward to the World Cup, I mean, one thing is probably Diego Leon will not be there. I think Paraguay will need to get used to that. I don't think Man United will want him to play, but we can find out and see what happens there because he will have just turned up the World Cups in September. But let's see. I mean, and also, is there an opportunity for two or three players that aren't in this squad at the moment if they have a good season in the local league or in Paraguay or in Argentina? Because there were quite a few Argentinian players, Argentinian-based players that came over, didn't make the final cut and went back. There's a few there. I mean, could they get a look in as well? So there's definitely a lot of excitement, I think, if you're around that 2007, 2008 group to try and be part of this team that's going to Chile.
I think looking at some of those players like you mentioned, like Diego Leon, like Aguayo, like everyone that's really been performing so well in this kind of tournament, like Lirusi, the goalkeeper. I mean, there really is some of these players, and it's always going to be hard to see how they do in their professional careers. I'm looking at like you said, that 2013 squad, and yeah, obviously you had some standouts, but not everyone had the career that they had. So there are going to be some of these guys from these 23 names that maybe won't pan out to be world beaters, and that's fine because not all of them will be. But I think there's going to be a lot of expectation as well because I think certainly for Paraguay doing so well in this kind of new era with Alfaro, and he was obviously there in Venezuela. Paraguay doing well at U23 level the last year, winning the Sudamericano, and then doing well at the Olympics. I think there is certainly going to be that sort of, I don't want to say expectation, but I think looking at some of the performances, I'm not going to say who could happen because we still got, as crazy as it sounds, we have a couple weeks left until those qualifiers against Chile and Colombia. I am curious to see if Alvaro looked at some of these players, and it's already big and competitive as it is. But like you've always said, he likes to gamble. There could be a case of some of these players that maybe, I'm not saying I don't know who, but maybe because they impressed so much, they get fast tracked to the senior squad.
Yeah, I think Diego Leon has a big chance for sure. And Aguayo went to the Copa America, right? He didn't end up playing, if I remember correctly, but he was there. So those are the two you would maybe expect. Octavio Alfonso has been very impressive, but I don't know where he would fit in your team when you have people like Almiron, Kaku, and uh, there's even Julian Cisa, Diego Gomez. I don't know where Alfonso would really fit in there, but I think he's been one that's very impressed. Komet is a great talent, but he's not going to work in an Alfaro team. Unfortunately, his style of play. I mean, it's a bit like Kaku. I think it's hard to find a place for them in the starting lineup. But yeah, I think it's very exciting for those players, and maybe March is too soon for some of them. But like you say, they're putting themselves in the right spot. And talking just about Paraguay, how things are picking up, yeah, it really starts, I think, around Morínigo, right? Gustavo Morínigo that went to 2017, 2019 U17s World Cups. Now then we had the of course the Sudamericano you mentioned the Preolímpico, sorry, for the U23s, but also the U15s won the South American Championship last year as well. And those youth under 15s, a lot of them are now with Uglesic in the under 17s. And so that's going to be really interesting. And yeah, Roberto, you're just pointing out in the chat, like Elvio Paloroso kind of came back to coordinate a lot of that. He had been for a long time during the Tata Martino years. He'd been part of the setup as well. So I think bringing in some of that experience has definitely helped to try and organize, despite some of the problems that we saw, because Aldo Ducha was not the right man for the job, and that's really become very clear now that they've qualified for the World Cup. There's still mistakes being made, and even if you look at the senior team, by the time they get to Alfaro, they've burned through a few people that really didn't work out. But you can see there's some good things happening. Paraguay also has the whole youth kind of installations have been upgraded in the last few years using FIFA money. So there's a lot coming together at the right time, which is making it very exciting. And hopefully you see Paraguay come back. I'm saying come back because that whole 90 kind of 92 from the Olympics up through 2010, that was really an era where similar things were happening, and they were going to just not just the senior World Cups, but the youth teams were performing well as well.
Yeah, I think it's really a snowball effect, you would say. Like, I think of course if Paraguay do qualify for the actual World Cup, I think that's going to really open doors for so many people. And then you have to look at kind of what's been going on at the youth level. So, and it kind of builds up to, the 2030 World Cup where they're going to be hosts, and there could be a lot of these players that will have the chance to play for the national team at their own World Cup, which, would be a huge honor for any player to do that. So no, it's a huge achievement. 12 years is a long time. I think it's certainly something that Paraguayan should feel very happy for. And I think given the recent good form that Paraguay has done at all levels, like the Preolímpico, now the U20, the senior team doing well, the U15 team winning the Sudamericano. Let's see if they continue it. I mean, they got the big games in March with the senior team, the U17 championship starting in a couple of weeks as well in Colombia. So that's obviously one to keep an eye out. And so yeah, it's been a good ride for them. And I think we have to, before we close it out, we have to send a special shout out to Antonino Garaz, because for him to manage what he did, and obviously I think he's such an important name for Paraguayans just because, like you said, he's had the experience of playing at a World Cup. He's done it at England, being the only Paraguayan to win a title in England, winning the FA Cup with Wigan. And so certainly that it is that respect, but also I think it's certainly the kind of mentality that he's had, because obviously he's played for these big clubs. He's played in Olympia as well. He's won titles there as a captain. So you have to give the shout out to Alcaraz for what he's been able to do.
Yeah, very much so, right? And very young as well. This is his first real job as kind of a head coach at any level. So it's a big moment for him. And like you said, he had all that experience, but he also, I think, tactically, I mean, is a bit stereotypical of Paraguay, but he just like got back to basics. And so we saw a team that didn't really use the ball much. They were very well set up counterattacks. They were very good at congesting the middle. It looked a bit like an Alfaro team, if we're honest. So who knows if Alfaro helped out in that respect. But it's also very hard sometimes for these players to actually transfer their skills on the pitch into management, as you see it all the time, right? With big stars, especially in national teams, that don't end up making, being able to transfer those skills. And there's obviously at the moment there's a big trend, especially in Europe, of people that actually weren't that good at football, but have been very good and spent a lot of time coaching, that they become, excuse me, they become some of the top coaches. So it's nice to see that this did work out and that he was able to use that experience. And I also think the personal experience of him having lived in Argentina, and having to work in Argentina, which is the reality of a lot of Paraguayans, not in football, just in life in general. And I think that resonated a lot with this particular group of players that had such a strong naturalized contingent, whose parents were probably in the same situation as Antolin Alcaraz and probably around the same age. So I think that really helped him relate to a group that had been like pulled in from a few different places, and it was something that Aldo Ducha clearly couldn't have done.
Yeah, it's all about that kind of related experience, and so yeah, obviously it's very happy to see it. We obviously cannot wait to see how they do in that tournament in Chile, and yeah, just how a lot of these players will kind of fare out in their kind of professional careers, because you have a lot of them that obviously will play for their senior clubs, maybe get fast promoted to the first team. So it's gonna be really interesting to see how they kind of develop before this tournament really starts. We'll switch into some good news to some bad news, because obviously we do have some bad news in terms of other Paraguayan teams that were able to kind of keep themselves alive in a South American competition. Unfortunately, it is over for Nacional, because they are out of the Copa Libertadores after that 1-1 draw against Alianza Lima in Asunción. They ended up going to Lima to try and keep that lead, or at least try to get a win there, and unfortunately they couldn't. Alianza Lima ended up winning 3-1 on the day. Goals from Kevin Quevedo and Hernan Barcos. Orlando Lugo ended up getting the only goal for Nacional, but unfortunately, El Tricolor was not able to do anything to qualify for the next stage.
Yeah, I think they've been in this stage 6 times in the qualifiers, and they've got through 3 times, and they've been out 3 times. So it's kind of half and half, but they've never won a game in Peru. And so that kind of curse continues for Nacional and for Pedro Sarabia. The last time he went there, he lost 5-1 to Sporting Cristal. It was 2 years ago. I think it was at the same stage, or maybe it was the phase two by them. But I mean, I really enjoyed the game, despite the result. I thought Nacional played the way they kind of had to play it, knowing that they weren't as good quality-wise on paper. They had to match the intensity of Alianza Lima, and really what Alianza Lima had to do was try and get up for the game with that crowd. It wasn't a full crowd, but it was a very loud crowd, and it was a good atmosphere. And we've seen Alianza Lima's history. Sometimes they crumble in the Copa Libertadores. I mean, they're kind of known for that. So for them, I think it was a really big moment that they managed to go up to the task, because really Nacional put it to them, especially in that first half, because the Guyana Lugo equalizer, which is a great strike, and then suddenly tackles are flying in and it's getting a bit heated, and that's exactly the game Nacional needed, right? That's what they wanted. In the end, I think it's 5 minutes in the second half where those 2 goals come in. They both come down the left-hand side of Nacional, both errors, but by different players. First, Gaston Benitez, and then Gustavo Caballero, who's tracking back, and they're just not quite strong enough, I thought. And what what Alianza Lima had, apart from a bit of that extra physical or athleticism, was they also were technically very good. So they were able to kind of deliver the right crosses in those moments. And with those 2 goals very quickly, one after the other, it kind of kills the tie, because you couldn't see Nacional scoring 3 goals in Lima. You might have seen them snatch a second, but there was no way they were going to score 3 and be able to equalize. So, I mean, yeah, it's a nice little run for Nacional. It was kind of, to be honest, we kind of felt this. I think we all talked about this in the preview. They just haven't started very well. They've lost some players. They were really missing forwards. They signed Christian Colman, but he's injured. Thiago Caballero is in the under-20s. He was in Venezuela. They brought on Francisco Morel, who I haven't seen for a while. The kid that at 18 made his debut, scored, and then scored the next game. But then he's been like in and out of the team. He's never really lived up to that potential. So just for them to try and find the goals was going to be very difficult. But like I say, I enjoyed the game. I thought a lot of intensity. Um, Nacional now really have to focus on the league, the bottom of the league, especially with Recoleta winning recently. So I mean, they just have to start getting that organization and grinding out a few results back in Paraguay to then make a case to try and get back into the Libertadores next year, and see what they can do from there.
Yeah, obviously we have to wait and see what happens, etc. That they don't have that same those same issues that Nacional's gone with because they obviously have to play Monagas, who had just disposed of Defensor Sporting of Uruguay 4-0 on aggregate. I mean, looking at the first leg, it's kind of funny that you look at someone like Diego Leon, Gabriel Aguayo, who was just in Venezuela. The tournament's about to end, and they have to go back to Paraguay and then back to Venezuela. So kind of a turnaround trip again for them. But Cedro, they really need to, they understand that they're favorites in this tie, and rightly so. And I think even the performances that maybe have been a bit inconsistent in the league have shown that, despite that, they should be able to qualify in this stage. But it's going to be very tough.
It's going to be very tough because they still haven't worked out the midfield like we keep talking about. I mean, the latest that he's tried Alexis Farinha there, he's Sonora he's tried, and then he dropped him for the last game. I'm trying to remember who he put, but all I remember is he hasn't put Pires Tamote yet, and I'm thinking, I think that's going to be your answer. I mean, I can't really see how you're going to play otherwise, and for Diego Martinez, I mean, he really has to sort this out for these games because if you're slipping up in the matches, against opposition in Paraguay, what's going to happen? Against the Trinidense, what's going to happen when you're playing in a top competition? And so, if they don't sort out the midfield, honestly, this is one of those games they can kind of slip up in. It is true what Cerro have, sorry, is they do have really good ability going forward. We've seen that. I really like Jonathan Torres. I think his movement and he can be a danger. But I mean, they have to be careful because they could slip up these games. If they come up against a well-organized Monagas team, then it could be quite difficult for them. So I mean, I'm sure we'll go into this in more depth in future shows. But I don't know. And now I'm not saying it's a given that they're gonna qualify into the next round.
Yeah, I think them getting a positive result, the time that we next talk, it's going to be after that first leg. So I think what we're going to see is going to be really a good impression of how good that Cedro side is under pressure and, if they can sort out that midfield, like you said. But I think ultimately the fact that they are playing at home kind of in the second leg, that kind of gives them a bit of an advantage. But, I think it's the case of how well they do away, where if it goes badly, then that kind of is going to be a demonstration of how this team really is prepared to play international competitions. But if they get a good result, it kind of helps them in a way to go to that return leg and have a lot of confidence. So we'll just have to wait and see what happens to them and if Diego Martinez can really sort it out for this Hedro side as we close out another great episode. But we wanted to finish off on another one because obviously we have to mention what's been going on in England because we have seen a really an exciting, I would say, last week. Obviously Diego Gomez being able to get that cameo for 20-25 minutes against Chelsea, and I thought he looked very good. I thought he looked really nice. He kind of slotted into that spot. I think it was for Hischelwood, or if I'm not mistaken. They were able to qualify. They were able to win 2-1 on the day. Really, really good game. But a lot of people were really obviously doing a lot of giving a lot of praise to Diego Gomez, even his manager Fabian Hurtzeller, saying that he's a warrior, saying that he's someone that's really adapting so quickly. So I think it really is only a matter of time, Ralph, that as much as we've seen Diego Gomez go through challenges and challenges again, here comes another challenge, and he's surpassing it once again.
Yeah, that's it, right? Every time he hits a higher level, you're like, okay, can he do it? And he always seems to impress. Obviously, this is just a small, cameo role, so we'll have to see as things go on because the key thing is consistency. But what a great start. And it was very funny to see Enzo Fernandez came on about the same time, and Diego Gomez has just won a midfield battle with him a few months ago, right? With Paraguay's win over Argentina, and then he does it again, and they're facing off as at the time of recording today because it's Brighton face Chelsea in the league now. But I think we saw what he is, right? He's like all action. He's winning the ball. He can win the ball high up, which is of course what Brighton want. He's taking shots. He's trying to make progressive passes. I mean, that's he has a bit of everything. I think that's why he's such an exciting player because he is very versatile, but in terms of doing it all in one game, he's really is that kind of all action and box to box kind of player, which was very popular in the Premier League for many years, and then it's kind of went out of fashion because you got like your Kante and your more kind of holding midfielders that were and people wanted to play with double pivots and all that kind of thing. And then maybe it's coming back as you see some of these teams that play with much more intensity now. And so a player like Gomez is actually finding his place in the world in the top league in the world. And so it's going to be exciting. Hopefully he can get some more game time. And another player, if we're just on the subject, is Ramon Sosa as well, right? Because Ramon Sosa has now scored 3 goals and he's only had 4 starts. I think he's had one Premier League start, one League Cup, and then 2 FA Cup, and he scored in the last 2
He's
FA Cup
actually,
games.
I'm just looking at it right here. He's actually joint third for top goal scorers in the entire for the entire Nottingham Forest side, which is dominated by Chris Wood with 17 and Morgan Gibbs White with 5, and then there's Ramon Sosa. But
There you go.
he is the goal scorer with the less minutes. So it's
Right.
493 minutes, and he's already joint third in all those goal scores. And a good season for Nottingham Forest as well.
Yeah, and a really good season and him playing well. And what I really liked about that Ramon Sosa goal that he scored this time was I think it's the first goal he scored that wasn't one touch because I think the other two was both like sliding in one touch. This time you saw a bit of his quality, right? That control to bring the ball down, 2 defenders, manages then to have the strength to continue and then to poke it in. I think all his goals he's ended up on his back, like he's sliding in. But there you go. I mean, which is not typical. Those people that saw him, of course, in Argentina, he was scoring from all kinds of angles, long shots and things. But it just shows you the good quality he has. So it's an exciting time, I think, especially for those 2 players. And with Enzo Gonzalez, now we're on the subject at Wolves. I think he's been told like April is an expected comeback time. Remember, he suffered that ACL in the Olympics. So that's also another bit of good news that hopefully he can start getting on the pitch again soon.
We haven't even mentioned Julian Ciso, but that will come. Obviously he has this few games with Ipswich that hopefully he can impress, and I think kind of this sort of debate about Hoodseller maybe not being a fan of South Americans or Paraguayans. I mean, if he's going out there really praising Diego Gomez, maybe that has more to say about Julian Ciso than his actual nationality. But that's another conversation for another time. Obviously, in that FA Cup, we got some just to close it out real quick. Obviously there's a lot of teams with Paraguayans still there. Could have been a Paraguayan against Paraguayan if Almiron had stayed put because Newcastle are going to play Brighton in the 5th round of the FA Cup on March 2nd. We also have another. It could have been a Paraguayan against a Paraguayan, but all these FA Cup rules have allowed you that you can't be cup tied because it's Nottingham Forest against Ipswich Town. So 2 times we could have gotten 2 Paraguayans facing each other in 2 different games. But unfortunately, it's only going to be 2 Paraguayans in 2 different games.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm hoping for Forest and Brighton to go through so we can get our two players that are going to be playing in the competition to keep going forward.
Yeah, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really interesting. And, obviously we have to close it here on a high because obviously Paraguayan qualifying, it's so good to speak about that. And, it's obviously very much happy for all these fans that have been supporting this U20 side moving forward. So great way to close another great episode of Guarani Vision for myself, Roberto Rojas, and Ralph Hanna. Thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.